Welcome, dear listener. If you enjoy these chilling tales, please subscribe for more horror. Now let's begin. The summer I turned 22, I took a job working overnight security for a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The building was massive, a gray block of concrete with endless rows of metal roll-up doors stretching deep into darkness. During the day, the place buzzed with customers unloading furniture, boxes, old photographs, and forgotten relics. But at night it was mine alone. Just me, my flashlight, and miles of silence. The manager, Mr. Lang, was a jittery man with darting eyes who barely looked at me when he hired me. He warned me about break-ins, about junkies slipping through the fences, about kids daring each other to spend a night in the units. What he didn't warn me about, what he refused to mention, was the smell that sometimes drifted through the hallways after midnight. Like burnt hair and rotting fruit, faint but sharp enough to turn the stomach. I noticed it my first week. The job was simple. Patrol each row, make sure the locks were intact, and sit in the office watching the cameras. It paid decently for a college dropout like me, and I didn't complain. But the nights grew stranger as August bled into September. The first incident was a sound, soft and steady, like someone dragging fingernails down corrugated metal. It came from Unit 137, a rusted door near the far end of the east wing. My logbook showed no one had entered that unit in 6 months. The tenant was late on payments. I approached, half expecting a raccoon to bolt out, but when I placed my ear against the cold steel, the scratching stopped instantly. I stood there holding my breath, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing. Just silence so deep I could hear my pulse. I wrote it off as pipe settling or maybe my imagination. But 2 nights later, the scratching returned. This time it was louder, accompanied by a low murmur, like voices whispering just on the other side of the thin door. My rational brain wanted to believe it was vagrants or maybe kids. I shouted, "Facility security!" and smacked the door with my flashlight. The noise cut off, and the silence that followed was suffocating. I lingered for a moment, then forced myself to walk away, though every instinct screamed at me not to turn my back. That night, while reviewing the security feeds, I noticed something that made my stomach flip. The camera trained on the east wing showed the row of units, each door closed and still. But around 2:13 a.m., the exact time I'd heard the whispers, Unit 137's door seemed to ripple, the metal bending inward as though something pressed against it from the inside. I leaned close to the monitor, squinting. The image was grainy, washed out by static, but the distortion was clear. The door bulged, then snapped back flat, like a breath exhaled. And then, in the corner of the frame, I saw movement, a tall, thin shadow stretching unnaturally long across the floor before vanishing off screen. I told myself the tape was corrupted. Cameras glitch all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the unease coiled in my gut. The smell returned the following week, sharper, more pungent, and clung to my clothes even after I left. It made my head ache, made me feel like I was standing too close to a campfire fueled by wet leaves. And then came the knocking. Not loud banging, not fists pounding, but delicate raps, as if a child's knuckles tapped slowly against the metal. 3 taps, pause, 3 more, always in the same rhythm. It followed me. I'd hear it at Unit 137, then halfway down the hall, echoing from another door. I tried ignoring it. I tried whistling to drown it out. But the knocking always returned, patient, deliberate, waiting for acknowledgement. One particularly humid night, with sweat sticking to my back and the air thick as soup, I decided to open the unit. I told myself I needed to know. If it was kids, I'd scare them off. If it was an animal, I'd chase it out. Anything was better than the festering dread chewing through my nights. I grabbed the bolt cutters from the office, marched down the east wing, and stopped before the door of 137. My hands shook as I snapped the lock. The clatter echoed down the corridor. I gripped the handle and yanked the door upward. It screeched open with a metallic groan. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness and landed on nothing. The unit was empty. Bare concrete floor, bare concrete walls. Not a single box, not a scrap of paper. Yet the smell was overwhelming, so strong my eyes watered. I gagged and staggered back, covering my nose with my sleeve. The air inside shimmered, as though heat rose from the ground. but the concrete was ice cold under my boots. I lowered the door, relocked it with a fresh padlock, and hurried back to the office. My head throbbed, and every shadow in the room seemed to twitch. That night I didn't watch the monitors. I couldn't, but the knocking didn't stop. It came from the office walls, from the vending machine, from inside the locked drawers of the desk. Always 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. The next morning, Mr. Lang pulled me aside. His eyes darted everywhere but mine. "Don't open Unit 137 again," he said flatly. His lips trembled like he wanted to say more but couldn't. "If you hear anything, log it. Nothing else. Do you understand?" I nodded numbly, though every fiber of me wanted to demand an explanation. He walked away, shoulders hunched, muttering something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. The days blurred. I stopped sleeping properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the unit. In my dreams, the door was open, and something leaned just inside the shadows. Tall, thin, with arms too long and a head tilted unnaturally like a broken doll. It never moved, never spoke, just watched. Its outline quivered like static. I'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, the smell of burnt hair filling my nostrils even though I was safe at home. I started seeing it outside the dreams, too, in the warped reflection of my TV screen, in the corner of my vision while driving. Always waiting. The breaking point came in mid-September. A storm raged outside, rain hammering the roof, thunder rattling the glass. I was in the office, staring blankly at the cameras, when the feed for the East Wing flickered. Static rolled, then cleared, and I froze. Unit 137's door was wide open. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't gone near it. I grabbed my flashlight and sprinted through the hall, my boots splashing through puddles of rain blown in by the storm. The smell hit me halfway there, thick and choking, clinging to my throat. When I turned the corner, the door stood yawning open, blackness spilling out like liquid. The knocking started, but this time it was deafening, pounding from every direction, rattling my teeth. My flashlight beam trembled as I lifted it toward the gaping unit. And that's when it stepped out. It was the figure from my dreams, impossibly tall, shoulders brushing the ceiling. Its arms dragged the floor, ending in fingers that scraped sparks from the concrete. Its face, or what should have been a face, was smooth and pale, featureless except for a faint depression where eyes might have been. Yet I felt it watching me, drilling through me, stripping me bare. My legs refused to move. My breath hitched in my chest. The thing tilted its head, and the knocking ceased, leaving a silence that roared louder than thunder. Then, in that silence, it raised one long finger and pressed it to the place where its lips should have been. A shushing gesture. My knees buckled. I fell backward, scrambling, the flashlight clattering to the floor. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure bending impossibly low, its faceless head inches from mine. I woke in the office at dawn. The monitors were blank, the storm had passed, and Unit 137 was sealed tight with a brand new lock. My logbook was gone. Mr. Lang stood in the doorway, eyes bloodshot, face drawn. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just said, "You won't be back tonight, or ever." He handed me my last paycheck in cash, shoved it into my trembling hands, and pushed me out the door. That was 3 years ago. I still dream of the figure. Sometimes I wake with the smell burning my nostrils, my walls shuddering with 3 soft taps. And sometimes, when I walk past a row of buildings or hear the screech of metal, I swear I see a shadow stretching too long across the ground, waiting for me to notice. The summer before my father died, my mother insisted we clean out the old family house in the countryside. It had sat empty for years after my grandparents passed, a sagging 2-story structure with peeling paint, boarded windows, and a yard swallowed by weeds. I hadn't been there since I was a child, but the place lingered in my memory like a stain. Dim rooms with crooked picture frames, the smell of mildew and dust, and the basement my cousins and I were too afraid to enter because we swore something lived in the shadows down there. My mother wanted to sell the property. I wanted nothing to do with it, but guilt pulled me along, and one August weekend I drove out with her to start the process. The air was heavy with the smell of soil and rain as we pulled into the gravel drive. The house loomed like a dark tooth against the gray sky. I remember thinking it didn't look abandoned so much as it looked watchful, like it had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for us to return. My mother unlocked the door and the hinges shrieked as if in protest. The inside was worse than I expected. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs draped from the ceiling like funeral veils. Furniture stood exactly as I remembered, as though my grandparents might shuffle in any moment and sit at the kitchen table, except for the layer of grime that suggested decades of silence. We set to work, boxing up books and dishes, tossing moldy clothes into trash bags. For hours, the air was filled with the rustle of paper and the dull thuds of objects being shifted. But as the light faded, an unease settled over me. The house seemed to sigh around us, floorboards groaning under weight that wasn't ours, faint knocks echoing through the pipes though the water had been shut off for years. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on my mother's steady determination, but my skin prickled with every creak, every whisper of wind that slipped through cracks in the wood. Then I found the photographs. They were tucked in the drawer of a nightstand in the upstairs bedroom, old Polaroids yellowed with age. At first, they seemed normal. Family gatherings, holiday dinners, my cousins and I playing in the yard. But then I noticed something odd. In every picture, no matter the setting or the year, a figure lingered in the background. Sometimes in the far corner of the room, sometimes half hidden behind curtains, sometimes standing at the edge of the yard. Always the same figure, tall, indistinct, blurred as if the camera lens refused to focus. Its face was always obscured, sometimes by shadow, sometimes by glare, but its posture was unmistakably human. A shiver crawled down my spine. "Find something?" my mother asked from the hallway. I slid the photos back into the drawer before she could see them. "Just junk," I said quickly. I didn't know why I lied. Maybe because the figure stirred something in me I couldn't explain. A memory? A fear too deep to name? That night we decided to stay rather than drive back to the city. My mother claimed she was too tired. I knew it was because she didn't trust me to finish the job if she left me alone. We unrolled sleeping bags in the living room. Rain pattered against the roof, and the old clock on the mantel ticked like a heartbeat. My mother fell asleep almost instantly, her breaths soft and steady. But I lay awake, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling beams, listening. At first it was only the rain and the occasional groan of wood. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, from upstairs. My heart lurched. I sat up, straining to hear. Another step, and another. My mother didn't stir. I told myself it was the house settling, the storm rattling loose boards. But deep down I knew the difference. These were footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the stairs. The beam cut through dust and shadow, illuminating peeling wallpaper and cracked frames. The air grew colder as I climbed, thick with the smell of damp earth. When I reached the landing, the sound stopped. The hallway stretched before me, lined with doors like watchful eyes. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but my feet carried me forward. I checked the first room, empty. The second, nothing but broken furniture. The third, stillness so heavy it pressed against my skin. I turned to retreat when something flickered at the end of the hall. A shape, tall, blurred, just like the photos. The flashlight flickered. Panic surged, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. The shape remained, unmoving, its face swallowed by shadow. Then, in the silence, I heard the sound that would haunt me forever. The slow, deliberate click of a Polaroid camera. My stomach dropped. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping, my breath ragged in my throat. My mother stirred as I collapsed beside her, whispering that someone was in the house. She sat up, bleary-eyed, but by then the rain had stopped and the silence had returned. "You were dreaming," she said, voice firm but trembling. She refused to let me check the photos. She refused to discuss it at all. The next morning she acted as though nothing had happened. We packed more boxes, avoided the upstairs, and spoke little. By afternoon I couldn't take it anymore. I told her I was leaving, that I couldn't stay another night in that house. She looked at me strangely, like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded. I drove back to the city with my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't look back once. A week later my mother called. Her voice was thin, brittle. "I've been having dreams," she whispered. "About the house. About someone taking pictures." My blood ran cold. She said she'd finish clearing the place on her own. I begged her not to, begged her to sell it as is, but she wouldn't listen. She said she had to face it. That was the last time I heard her voice. 3 days later, the sheriff found her car parked outside the house, keys still in the ignition. Inside, every room was stripped bare, every box stacked neatly in the hall. But she was gone. No sign of forced entry, no trace of struggle, just gone. On the living room mantel sat a Polaroid camera, ancient and cracked, with one photograph still developing. The image was of my mother, standing in the hallway upstairs, her face blurred, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her loomed the figure, taller than the doorway, its hand resting on her shoulder. The police called it a missing persons case. I called it something else. I knew what took her. I knew it had been waiting for us, watching all these years, bleeding into every photograph like a parasite. Sometimes at night I dream of flashes, the mechanical click of film, the blinding burst of light. And when I wake, I swear the air smells faintly of damp earth and old chemicals. Last week I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was a Polaroid. It showed me asleep in my bed, mouth open, face turned toward the camera. Behind me, leaning out of the darkness, was the figure. Its hand was raised, as though reaching for me. The picture is on my desk right now, and I can't stop checking the corners of my room, waiting for the flash. When I was 17, I worked weekends at a roadside diner outside of town, the kind of place with flickering neon lights, cracked vinyl booths, and coffee that tasted like burnt tar. It sat on a lonely stretch of highway, where truckers stopped at 3 in the morning, and strangers drifted in and out without leaving names. Most of my shifts passed uneventfully, the hours filled with the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of the jukebox. But one night in late September, just as the summer ended and the nights grew colder, something happened that has carved itself into my memory like a scar. It was nearly midnight when a man walked in. He was tall, gaunt, his shoulders hunched as though weighed down by invisible chains. His clothes were plain, black jacket, gray pants, but what struck me most was his face. Pale, almost colorless, with skin that stretched too tight over his bones, and eyes that seemed clouded, as though veiled by smoke. He slid into a booth in the corner without a word. I brought him a menu, but he didn't touch it. He just stared at the window, though beyond it was nothing but black highway and weeds swaying in the wind. "Coffee," he rasped finally, voice dry and uneven. I poured him a cup, but when I set it before him, he didn't drink. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes fixed on the glass as if waiting for something. The other waitress, Donna, whispered to me behind the counter. "He's been here before. Twice this week. Always the same, sits, stares, never eats." I asked if she knew him, but she shook her head, her lips tightening. "Feels wrong, doesn't he?" she murmured. I nodded, though I couldn't explain why. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't strange in any obvious way, and yet his presence was like a draft seeping under the door, cold and unsettling. At 1:07 a.m., the power flickered. The lights buzzed, the jukebox stuttered, and for a moment the diner was plunged into darkness. My heart skipped. When the lights returned, the man was no longer in his booth. The cup of coffee sat untouched, steam curling faintly from its surface. Donna swore under her breath. We searched the diner, even stepped outside into the chill air, but the lot was empty. No cars, no sound of footsteps fading down the highway. He had vanished. I tried to shake it off, but unease hung over me like smoke. When my shift ended, I drove home with the radio low, headlights carving through mist. My house sat on the edge of town, surrounded by trees that clawed at the sky. I killed the engine, stepped out, and froze. The diner's coffee cup was sitting on my front porch. Same chipped rim, same faint curl of steam. My breath caught. I backed toward the car, fumbling for the keys, when a voice rasped from the shadows. "You forgot to take my order." I spun, flashlight beam jerking through the dark. Nothing, just the hiss of crickets and the creak of branches. I bolted inside, locked every door, every window. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face, those smoke-veiled eyes. At 3:14 a.m., the phone rang. My hands shook as I lifted the receiver. Static, and beneath it, a voice, faint but clear enough to chill me to the bone. Table for one. Then the line went dead. The next morning, I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even a prank. I forced myself to return to work. But the man came back. Every night, always around midnight, always sliding into the same booth. Sometimes he'd order coffee, sometimes nothing at all. He never ate, he never blinked. And every night at 1:07 a.m., the power flickered and he disappeared. I started avoiding his booth, refusing to serve him. But Donna warned me not to. "If you don't," she whispered, "he'll follow you home again." Her eyes were wide, haunted. I asked if he'd ever come to her place. She didn't answer, but I noticed the bruised shadows under her eyes, the way she flinched at every ring of the diner phone. A week later, she stopped showing up for work. They found her car abandoned on the highway, driver's door open, headlights still burning into the night. She was never found. I quit the diner the next day, swore I'd never set foot near it again. But the man didn't stop. He followed me. I'd see him standing at the far end of grocery aisles, reflected in store windows, lingering at bus stops without ever boarding. Always watching, always waiting. Sometimes I'd come home to find objects moved, chairs pulled from the table, photographs turned face down, the faint smell of coffee curling in the air. My phone would ring at night, static hissing through the receiver, followed by that same rasp, "Table for one." The last time I saw him was 3 years ago. I woke to the sound of footsteps creaking through my house. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, heart hammering, and crept into the hallway. The air smelled like burnt coffee grounds. When I reached the living room, I froze. He was sitting at my table, my own kitchen table, hands folded, eyes veiled in smoke, staring at me with a hunger that wasn't human. The clock on the wall ticked over to 1:07 a.m., and the power went out. Darkness swallowed the house. When the lights came back, the chair was empty. I moved to another city the next week, changed my number, cut all ties. I haven't worked a night shift since, but sometimes late at night, when the power flickers and the silence grows too heavy, I smell coffee. And I know he hasn't forgotten me. He's still waiting, patient as the grave, for me to sit down across from him and take his order. Thanks so much for watching. If this story gave you chills, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories just like this one, and let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories below. Stay safe out there, and lock your doors.